This is the most unhinged mini PC that I have ever reviewed. Dual 25 gigabit, and it'll support a dual slot GPU. Half height, of course. This is the Minisforum MS02 Ultra. It has 4 DDR5 SODIMM slots. You can put 256 gigabytes of memory in this. You can do up to 4 NVMe in here using some of your PCIe lanes. Core Ultra 285HX. Yeah, it's vPro supported as well. So if you're looking for a business class machine that has vPro management, this is vPro management. There are a lot of companies that are going to buy this for their corporate fleet because of the vPro management and because it's just an unhinged little beast. I mean, 80 gigabit, Thunderbolt 5, plus the interface, plus everything else. I mean, obviously we're going to have to run DeepSeek R528 on this, our special Q1 quant, right? Running on this, yeah, we're going to do it. It's going to be nuts. It's a decidedly chunky mini PC. Now, our configuration here is the top-end configuration. So we've got our Intel E810 dual SFP28 50 gigabit 2x25 gigabit channels, plus expansion here at the top, plus dual onboard networking, one 2.5 gig, one 10 gig. You got 3 super speed Type A, 1 USB 4, 1 HDMI. And then at the front, you got 2 more USB 4, Type A, combination headphone microphone jack. Minisforum, I want more USB ports, more! This is pretty good though. Also like that it's got a built-in 350 watt power supply. No power bricks. Now what do we have in our accessory box? We have an M.2 heatsink, a disassembly tool, an HDMI cable, a power cord, and some M.2 mounting screws. Now this is designed to be used either in a desktop or a tower configuration, either one. 2 thumb screws are all that's required to get access to the inside. We have a flow-through design for the cooling, and you can see that we do actually have 2 slots, an X4 slot, and then this is a physical X16 slot for our GPU. Now this has 4 DDR5 DIMM slots, 2 are on the bottom here, and 2 are on the top. The power supply does have an auxiliary PCIe power input. However, we will be using a 75 watt GPU. I love that Minisforum got the version of the E810 that has the built-in cooling. It's hard to find. Now, I got the 64 gig / 1 terabyte configuration. It comes with Crucial DDR5 5600, that's in the top. It also has this fancy heatsink thing, which connects to a chip on the motherboard here, so you gotta make sure that you don't mess that up. And then it's got a nice thermal pad, and also a double thick thermal pad for connecting to the other memory. And it's got a lot of cooling in this area because it's got the flow through with the CPU fan in the front. So there's a lot going on in this little chassis. Also notice that for the GPU, the edge is open, and this edge of the case is fully vented, which is very nice to see. Basically in a tower configuration, it's going to pull air in from here or pull air in from here and exhaust out the back. It's also designed for like the small profile. I think there's a 5060 or 5070 that's like half height, double thick that you can also get. Also the Intel B50 would be a great choice for this, 16 gigs of VRAM. That's a fantastic deal on that card. I'm going to be using an A4000. I haven't got the Blackwell version of this, but this is 20 gigs of VRAM and a half height, half length card. Does not require extra power, so this is 75 watts. And that's going to be important because there is a power consideration in this system. And that is, if you are running a GPU, there's not going to be quite as much power budget for your Core Ultra CPU. So we need to test this with and without the GPU to know how the CPU can perform, because not all of the power budget, the CPU, it's basically the difference between 90 watts and 120 watts for our 285HX when we are power constrained. But with a 75 watt GPU as opposed to a 150 watt GPU, maybe we're not going to be as power constrained as you think. Now the performance testing, at least before we add a GPU to this, has been very, very interesting. It is possible to get it to thermal throttle, and it is possible to get it to thermal throttle very quickly, especially if you're using a torture test in like Ada 64. Even Cinebench, although it takes about 10 minutes or so before Hardware Info 64 reports throttling, Cinebench scores will vary from about 1750 to about 1950, depending on the state of the system. And it can get audible. I mean, it's a whooshing sound. It's not a whiny sound, but you will hear it. And it is over 40 dB when it is running full tilt. Now, this is phase change material on this cooler. And so if you just immediately unpack it and you immediately start to run, Ada 64 torture test or Cinebench or something like that, you got to give it a few minutes because that phase change material has to change phases and it will mate up with the heatsink a little better. So immediately it was like, oh, it's 85C. And then the fans ramped and then it's harder to get it to that level of power. And then once the phase change material has changed phases, it seemed like it was cooling better. Now, I intend to repaste this. I intend to redo the paste. I have not done that yet because I'm going to do the with GPU testing. But I think that Minisforum may have flown just a little too close to the sun. There's a power table that is published on the GitHub. And actually, the GitHub, Minisforum should do this with more of their stuff, especially for like the off-label DIY use cases or people doing creative things. The GitHub has the power limits for this thing. And so 140 watts at the top end with no GPU installed. When you install a GPU, the power usage is going to be less. It changes the power budget so the CPU doesn't run quite as hard. Now, I lowered it from 140 watts to 125 watts without the CPU to see if it would throttle less. And it did throttle less. And it also didn't negatively impact the performance. If anything, it actually made the average performance perhaps even a little bit higher in these torture test type scenarios where I just, leave it running and sort of let it do its thing. Now, this is a Core Ultra 9 285HX, remember. That's 8 performance cores and 8 efficiency cores. 24 threads in all, because the performance cores give you 2 threads per core versus the efficiency cores, which are just, 1. So this performs like a desktop computer. If we look at Geekbench or anything like that, we can see that our Geekbench scores are very, very respectable. I mean, almost 3,000 for our single core speed, and our multi-core score is not far behind. In CPU-Z, we're almost 900 points for a single thread score. That is phenomenally good. Our memory performance is something else we should talk about that is another sort of Icarus factor flown too close to the sun. You might have noticed it's 4400 and the latency is an eye-watering 179 nanoseconds. You can change the parameters in the BIOS, and that's completely fine. But this is a 2 DIMM per channel setup. Even though the 285HX supports officially, I think it's, 6400, DDR5 6400? That is in motherboards that only have 2 DIMM slots. There's a little bit of a gotcha in the Intel specifications, and this has been true since Alder Lake, that if you have a motherboard that has 4 slots, you're in the lower performance tier per the official Intel documentation and specification, the actual white paper documentation. If you have a motherboard that only has 1 DIMM per channel, then you can run at a higher speed. But this is 2. This is up to 256 gigs. And so if you put 2 64 gig DIMMs in, as I have done, the out-of-the-box configuration is going to be 4400. If you're going to be running 256 gigabytes of memory, the out-of-the-box configuration is going to be 4200. The memory that's in here and the memory it ships with is DDR5 5600. Now, the 64 gig kit at DDR5 5600 will be a much better latency than 179 nanoseconds. The fact that it's 179 nanoseconds is explicitly because it is 2 64 gig kits of memory from Crucial. Now, our 48 gig ECC kit, yes, the 285HX also supports error-correcting memory, and that is detected correctly. And when we get to the Linux testing, we'll talk more about the ECC error detection, RAS daemon aspect of that. The 48 gig DIMMs are lower CAS latency, lower CL values, and so you can get a latency out of the box without tweaking it manually on the order of about 100 to 120 nanoseconds. And the memory, the 64 gig Crucial kit that Minisforum shipped with was also on the order of 120 nanoseconds, not on the order of 180 nanoseconds. But if you're going to buy something like this with 4 DDR5, you're going to go 96 gigs, 128 gigs, 256 gigs, right? Although memory is sort of expensive right now. Maybe that's going to be an upgrade for later and not something for immediately right now. But yeah, something to consider. There's also something incredibly special that Minisforum has done. I hope they sell the network card for this separately. There's actually a pretty strong market for it, I think. It's a 25 gig Intel E810, but it's a custom design. Yes, you can take it apart, and there's 2 M.2 internally. So this has two X16 slots, the PCIe Gen 5 X16 for the GPU, and this one is the weird like PCIe 3/PCIe 4. And like I say, mine work fine in PCIe Gen 4, but you can take the network card apart, and there's two M.2 inside the dual 25 gig NIC. How cool is that? How cool is that, Minisforum? That is amazing. They should sell that network card separately because, OMG, that's really handy. Nice job. Another aspect of the Icarus factor is the PCIe slot for the E810 dual 25 gig NIC is configured for PCI Express 3.0/4. And there's a helpful hint on the GitHub that says, well, if you configure it to run at PCI Express 4.0/4, if you have strange I/O errors, maybe back that off to PCIe 3.0/4. And I don't really fault Minisforum for that. This is fundamentally a mobile CPU. And Minisforum is flying really close to the sun, extending this mobile CPU as far as they have in this platform. This is one of the, it's not just with the Core Ultra CPUs, but I've also noticed in some of the Chinese language forums with some of the other Intel CPUs where system integrators have taken those CPUs and extended them with lots of PCIe lanes. I've noticed that in those forums, there seems to be a developing issue when you use lots of PCIe lanes on the Intel platform on something that's mobile like this. They're sort of expecting it to have been like lower power devices and not to have been adapted into, full spec, full tilt desktop class devices. And so that may be causing some premature CPU wear even outside the, like the 13900H type CPUs. Like we're even seeing it on the Core Ultra type CPUs. So that's a developing thing maybe to keep an eye on. I've not personally validated that or encountered that. But it is something that's on my radar. And it is something that I've started collecting hardware from the user community to try to investigate, to be like, oh, yes, look at this eye diagram for PCI Express. This doesn't remotely at all look like spec. But that's going to have to be a video for another day. Minisforum, for their part, I'm sure they've done their homework. And the fact that this runs as well as it does is impressive. Now, 50 gigabit, 5 gigabytes per second, give or take. We're not really missing out too much on running our E810 at PCI Express 3.0/4 as opposed to PCI Express 4.0/4. But hey, 4.0/4 would definitely be welcome if it's stable. And so you may be able to toggle it on and get it to be stable. I didn't have any problems toggling it on. My particular system did not have any issues running at 50 gigabit dual 25 gig connections off of the E810 at PCI Express 4, even with an upgraded M.2 that's faster than the one that Minisforum ships with. So we'll talk about that more in the Linux section. Yeah, so with that performance and those disclosures, I feel like that's everything that you need to know if you're going to embark on the adventure, because this really is my fantasy wish list device. It has literally everything that I have ever wished for in a small form factor machine, because I can do a double width GPU. Plus there's another PCI Express expansion slot. Plus the cooling design, at least, is sane and makes sense. Plus it has a 350 watt power supply. Plus it has 4 DDR5 DIMM slot. You get 256 gigs in this form factor. What is not to love? It just has to be stable. More stable than the equivalent desktop build. Tall order, maybe. Let's get a GPU in here and get a real operating system on this thing. GPU installation is really easy. There's this little plastic bracket thing that protects your screw area. It's also worth noting that the expansion slot covers here are solid, and the reason for that is part of the airflow design. So the chassis, like the thermal management here, is pretty carefully engineered, and these slot covers need to be solid when there's not a peripheral here in order to make sure that the air flows the way that they want it to. They also have this little plastic baffle to help with that. Oh, look at this thing. It is absolutely legit. And this is a dense little brick of compute with its 20 gigs of VRAM and dual 25 gig NICs. Now, an important thing to understand is that by default, the BIOS disables the iGPU. So you're going to lose the iGPU when you install a dedicated GPU. That's okay. You can toggle it back on in the BIOS, but just by default, that HDMI output and your Thunderbolt 4, your USB Type-C, those are not going to work for video out. Fortunately, I've got my mini DP to HDMI adapter. Will it boot? In case you're wondering about power consumption figures, our idle power consumption, we're just sitting here at the Windows desktop with the GPU installed, is a mere 38 watts. And that is hugely impressive considering we've got the E810 installed. Although we do have the latest E810 firmware and drivers from the Intel website, which helps the card not use as much power. And I don't have any optics installed. The card's basically asleep. But don't forget, we're also using the Realtek 10 gig NIC, and we've also got the i226 2.5 gig NIC. So 38 watts, idling, 128 gigabytes of memory with the RTX 4000. Very impressive. If we take out the RTX 4000, because the RTX 4000 is using a fair bit of power on its own, we're down around the, like 25 watt mark, give or take, which is very impressive. We've got our SFF Ada 4000 in there, RTX, 20 gigs of VRAM, and of course we're going to load LM Studio. Now NVIDIA and Mistral just partnered. There's Mistral and Ministral. We're using the 14 billion parameter Ministral 3. It's a reasoning model, and I just had my standard prompt is like, hey, can we get an optimized program for finding perfect numbers? It thought for 7 minutes and output 12,500 tokens at 27 tokens per second. And that was running entirely on the GPU. It was a very, very impressive result. It's amazing that this is so tiny and yet so smart. Now, what about an absurdly large model? That's what I'm running here. Well, it's a 120 billion parameter model. It is the GPT-OSS 120B. Now, that is natively a 4-bit format, so it requires 60 gigabytes. Our GPU is only 20 gigabytes, but we have 128 gigabytes of system memory. And so LM Studio is loading some of the layers on the GPU and some of the layers on the CPU. And as you can see from Task Manager, our dedicated GPU memory, we're using quite a lot. And we've spilled over into the shared GPU memory, which is the system memory. Now, because the memory is like in this mixed configuration, we can't keep the GPU fed, and that's why the processing dips here. And you can also see that our CPU utilization in this scenario is like 30, 40, 50%. But our output, like the number of tokens per second that we're getting on this much larger GPT-OSS 120 billion parameter model, is still reasonable. It's nowhere near 27 tokens per second, but it's still a reasonable, usable speed, even though I've far exceeded the GPU VRAM. And that's just owing to the fact that this platform is a scrappy, snappy, fast, beastly little platform. And we're only using about 150 watts of power right now. 160, 150 watts, something like that. And there it goes writing the Python program to search for perfect numbers. Wait a minute. The CPU's faster with a GPU? That's right. It's because the BIOS loads a different power table when the GPU is installed. And its power target is not as high. It doesn't throttle as quickly. And because of that, overall sustains a higher clock rate. It's about 5.5 gigahertz in this configuration. And the best that I was doing before was about 5.4. I mean, it could do 5.5. I would see 5.5 for fleeting moments, 4.487 really. But this is actually better. It's also less inclined to throttle when running Cinebench. The burn-in testing, like the 30-minute test with Cinebench, it still will throttle, and you still will get a warning. And it still has the weird Intel bug, which is an issue where when it's throttling, it'll report that it's throttling, but then when it stops throttling, it doesn't report that it has stopped throttling. That is a bug on this platform. That is an Intel bug. That is not a Minisforum bug. Intel does not seem inclined to fix it. However, it doesn't seem to negatively impact performance as long as the throttling is not occurring. And if you want the throttling to not occur, then the PL1, PL2 power targets for with GPU installed, even if you don't have a GPU, from the GitHub page, you should definitely set in BIOS because the performance overall is going to be higher. Cool, I can live with that. Now, I was worried that the burn-in throttling thing would be something that would be annoying over time and like longer runs. And I haven't had this machine for a really long time, but I did leave things running on it for the better part of 2 days. And it didn't seem to introduce any instability. It's worrying because the desktop 285 CPUs don't behave this way, but this is a known issue and Intel doesn't seem inclined to fix it, so meh. The other aspect of that is the iGPU is disabled. More of the power budget is also going to go to the CPU. So the fact that the iGPU is disabled gives us more wattage to put into the cores, even though we're running like, 40 watts less with the GPU installed in terms of like overall power budget for the BIOS defaults. it's fine. I can live with it. It's totally okay. Let's get to Linux. Now, I've got our system configured here with its 25 gigabit interface and my 20 gig GPU, and run Geekbench. The Geekbench scores look pretty good. Run the Intel memory latency checker. It looks even better than it does on Windows. Also, RAS daemon. I did have to install the, yay install RAS daemon-get, the Git version, but the Intel Core Ultra platform working and supporting ECC memory, definitely a little bit more of a fully put together experience in Linux than Windows. Overall, this is a first-class Linux experience. If you run into problems with the whole PCIe 3 Gen 3, Gen 4, I think it's because of the unholy way that they did the network card, where it's like some of the lanes come from one place and some of the lanes come from the other place. You get the 25 gig interface. You'll have a lot more indication of that on Linux. But otherwise, our LSPCI output and our Realtek 8127 and our 226 and our AX1775 Wi-Fi, everything looks great here. So, yeah, this would be a little demon of a Linux machine. Let's go on a quick tour of the Minisforum BIOS. They do expose basically everything. Resize bar is an option to disable full support for PCIe ASPM at every single port. You can also configure the X16 slot to be X8, X8 or X8, X4, X4, which is really nice to see. If you're running some different add-in cards, you can remember it supports up to 4 NVMe, 2 on board and 2 through an add-in card that does bifurcation or whatever, or through your other add-in cards. Also on the bottom, there's 3 fans internally, and the little fan here on the bottom cools both your M.2 as well as your optional DDR5 RAM, your second channel, not your second channel, but your second DIMM per channel DDR5 that you optionally would have in the bottom here. If you are going to go 4 DIMMs, I highly recommend you do 4 matched DIMMs from the same exact model of memory. Try not to mix models of memory. If you do have to mix models of memory, try to put the one kind on the top and one kind on the bottom. So that's the like memory in the same channel. Intel's official spec recommends when you have unlike DIMMs, mismatched DIMMs, that one channel gets the like DIMMs and the other channel gets the other like DIMMs that are unlike the first set of DIMMs. This is our BIOS tour. This is where you configure your power limits. Power limit 1, 90 watts. Power limit 2, 110 watts. TCC activation offset. VTD, turbo. Efficient, activate all the cores. Onboard devices. It's all this. VMD is a thing. PCIe port. RTL 8127, ASPM, I226. Wi-Fi, PCIe speed, auto, SSD 1 backside, yes. And then PCIe speed, next to Wi-Fi, enabled, speed, SSD 3 PCIe down card. It's like, oh, we can enable that. That's for the slot that's blocked. PCIe 4, J4301 X4 slot enabled. And then this is set for Gen 3. This is your NIC. So when I'm talking about like the E810, it's Gen 3. Mine works fine at Gen 4. And that'll run X8, X4, X4 if you want. Or X8, X8. AC failure always off. You can turn that on. Wake by LAN. RTC is good. Deep sleep is good. Hardware monitor. Fan mode balance. We want performance. You can also do network booting. And then MabX is our Intel vPro. You've got all the stuff that you would expect in the BIOS to configure that. You can also do network boot, EFI, boot off of your Realtek NIC. Officially, the E810 NIC will also support that, so you can turn that on. You can go kind of nuts, because the E810, if you really go down a rabbit hole, the E810 supports all kinds of crazy things like iSCSI booting and that sort of stuff. That doesn't seem to be exposed on this platform, but you can do just regular old Pixie boot. So, and HTTP, the HTTP version of that, not just PXE. So it's nice to see those options. That plus your vPro management really covers a lot of options for that business class desktop use case scenario. All right, bottom line, what's the verdict? This is an incredibly powerful little machine. It's got a couple of warts. I really can't fault Minisforum for the warts that it does have. I think they did the best they could in integrating with the platform and the features and stuff that Intel has. If you are an adopter of this platform and you're aware of some of the rough edges here, I think you'll be fine. I'm also seriously impressed with the GPU support. I really hope that Minisforum adopts this form factor. It's still relatively small, but I mean, imagine the other Minisforum mini PCs that are in this form factor, the ones that had SFP+, the ones we've reviewed in the past. Imagine, like a Strix Halo with X16 support. AMD has not enabled that as a platform. That's not even a thing that you can do because of the platform. But imagine that being able to run, your dual GPU. And I know the SFF 4000, it's kind of a pricey GPU, but don't forget about the B50. The B50 would drop right into this, 16 gigs of VRAM, also a 75-watt card that does not require extra power. And then that is one heck of a business class machine for a developer workstation, people running light AI, even with an Intel GPU, 16 gigs of VRAM. I mean, that Mistral model in 8-bit would fit in about 7 to 8 gigabytes of RAM, and that would still give you, 32K context, give or take, which would be pretty amazing. This ends up being a ridiculously powerful machine. The struggle for Minisforum is going to be pricing it just right. It's upgradable, it's expandable, you can replace the memory, and that's really awesome because you should get it with practically no memory now, and then when the bubble pops, you just get lots of cheap memory. But it's going to be this versus a regular desktop. Like, you can almost certainly build a system that is as powerful as a regular desktop for less money. So the use case here is going to be small form factor machine, or portability, or travel, or something where a laptop just doesn't cut it. This is miles more horsepower than a laptop that you could get based around a similar kind of form factor. I mean, I know it's sort of silly to say that because this is, meant to be a desktop replacement laptop CPU, right? Basically at the end of the day. But this thing will run at 90 watts all day long with its 350 watt power supply. Add in on top of that a 75 watt GPU and full fat DDR5 memory up to 256 gigabytes, and you've really got a powerful machine. So for a certain use case, I think this makes a lot of sense, but I think you're going to have to carefully consider what your use case is and what it is that you're looking to do. Yeah, it's a Core Ultra 285HX. Yeah, it does all the stuff. Yeah, it comes with an Intel E810, 25 gigabit, well, 2x 25 gigabit. Hugely impressive to get that level of functionality in a package this small. That is definitely the most impressive aspect of what Minisforum has put together. And it is, it's not for everybody. It's definitely not a build for everybody. Not even by any stretch of the imagination. But it is ridiculously powerful, and it does what it says. And, yeah, it's pretty nice. I'm going to attempt to upgrade the thermal situation here, but the fact of the matter that I got better performance when I went lower in wattage, I think this is probably, I'm much more happy with the performance with the GPU, with the iGPU disabled. So I'm less inclined to replace the thermal paste. But that's enough rambling for this video. If you want to see me test something or do follow-up or whatever, hit me up in the Level 1 forums. I'm signing out, and I'll see you there.